Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, the number one source for news, analysis, and discussion on the Detroit Red Wings, the NHL, and all things hockey. Here are your hosts, Ryan Hanna, Brad Crisco, and Evan Lopsinger.
So you're saying you won't do a shoey to start the episode?
I said, do you need me to do one?
Yes.
And I said yes. I didn't bring my Crocs. But maybe next time.
Winged Wheel Podcast, Crocs. Actually, Catherine had the great idea for, what are they called? Gibbets?
Yeah, they're the little things you put in the holes of the Crocs. We are too old to be having this conversation.
Stupid. The LCA doing shoeys is the most out there new tradition that I've seen, but I have to say, for our very large and strong contingent of Australian Detroit Red Wings and Winged Wheel Podcast fans, they have to be loving it.
I did not have Ken and Mick relaying to the viewers at home that fans were doing shoeys and that they mostly knew what those were.
They're in mid-season form.
Yeah.
The LCA crowd, man, even when the Red Wings are bad or having a tough go on any specific game or a period, they know how to have fun, at least.
Will this become a thing in Detroit?
Red Wings fans don't strike me as the type to stop doing funny stuff like that. So if the woo has lasted this long, I have to imagine the shoey is going to persist.
I am in agreement with you.
And we are going to have to set a Wings Money on the Board fundraising goal for you to do a shoey on the podcast.
Oh, I don't know what that figure is yet. I'll have to sleep on it, but I don't think it'll be unattainable.
New goals for the Winged Wheel Podcast. Welcome, folks, to this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, the first one officially now that the Detroit Red Wings season has started. Here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we have Red Wings games, official regular season games that actually matter to discuss. One really, really, really bad, like not great, and another one relievingly a win. So that is, it wouldn't have been the end of the world, but I'm very happy that we are not coming into this episode 0-2 to start the season. So we'll be talking about those two games, injuries, movement on the Red Wings roster, who is great, who is terrible, what we have to look forward to, and then Red Wings news that has just dropped today in terms of Ville Husso being waived, what the roster and cap flexibility needed will lead to, and then what's going on in Grand Rapids with Marco Kasper and company off to a hot start, at least in their first game, and then what that means for the Red Wings. We'll have a discussion on Detroit's upcoming moves, how they've been quick to make moves so far, and what this means for Steve Yzerman and Derek Lalonde as they look to shape this Red Wings roster. And then anything else we can get into before we get into NHL news. Utah's hot start, Brady Tkachuk's head face. He's such a himbo, that dude. What a dweeb, but hilarious. And other NHL news before we take your questions and comments in overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know two things. First, the Winged Wheel Podcast is primarily supported by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. You get access to benefits like, for example, our ticket giveaway to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. So a patron won the tickets to the home opener, 2 tickets, and 2 tickets to the next game. And we're going to be doing that all year long. This is our 3rd season doing it. You also get access to the Winged Wheel Podcast Discord, as well as all of our bonus episodes and bonus content. We record a bonus episode after each main episode, where not only do we answer any questions that didn't make the main show, but we throw in bloopers. There's a good one for you to kick this one off. We let loose, have fun, tell stories. It's a good time. Again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast for all of that and more. The theme of this episode is it's just one game. It's just 2 games. It's just the start of the season. Don't panic yet. But.
Don't tell me what to do.
And the but is part of that theme, because I still think there are conclusions to draw from what we saw in that opening game, but not conclusions where I'm going to be, hitting the panic button to the fullest degree on the entire team or individual players. But man, that opener, the 6-3 final Pittsburgh Penguins over the Detroit Red Wings. First 10 minutes, you were there, Evan. First 10 minutes looked good.
It looked like every Red Wing home opener that we've witnessed in the past 6 years. The Red Wings were all over them. They were making Crosby and Malkin look like they didn't even exist. And then until it wasn't.
The offense looked good. Larkin to Raymond with a sweet pass over to DeBrincat, the one-timer goal. You're like, oh my God, DeBrincat hit his shot. Lucas Raymond didn't even miss a step. Obviously, Dylan Larkin's part of that play. Things are going so well, and then the defense across the board. You can't point to very many people other than maybe Mo Seider who you can say like weren't a part of the problem.
Wasn't there something floating around about the game scorecards for that game? And number 1 for the Red Wings was Mo Seider, and the bottom 5 were the other 5 defensemen.
Unsurprising from what you saw.
That's remarkable. Like, that should be the frame that we put on the internet every time someone questions Mo Seider in terms of results versus usage, because he performs, the rest of the D doesn't. Again, to reiterate before people make panic replies for what I'm going to say, it is only one game. It is only 2 games. Not to draw huge conclusions, but the part about the first game and how poorly they played that really, really got to me wasn't that there were a lot of problems. It was the most predictable issues for this team were big problems that game. We knew the defense was going to be bad, and they were atrocious. We knew the goaltending was questionable at best going into the season, and it was not great. And we knew the bottom 6 forwards were going to mostly be outmatched, and they were pretty spectacularly. So that was the problem. Again, it's one game. Every line, every player on this team is going to have bad games. Larkin's going to have a bad game at some point this season. Raymond's going to have one. Like, it's going to happen. But just the fact that it was so soundly and so predictable.
Simon Edvinsson, for example, like I thought his game 2 is way better than his game 1. In his game 1, he had his moments, but he made mistakes on defense where I thought, not good. You want to see much better from him. That's not acceptable over the course of a season. But you understand as effectively a rookie why he was making those mistakes, especially when, you know, the entire team was collapsing defensively. The one to me where I was like, oh, bad, this is not a good sign, was Erik Gustafsson. Because Erik Gustafsson, all offseason, we said, we don't know what he's going to be. If it's going to be successful, it'll look like, you know, a Shane Gostisbehere type where you accept that you're not going to get the same level of offense as you got from Ghost, but maybe not as black hole of a defense. You didn't really see that in preseason, to put it gently, but you don't draw conclusions from preseason. Guys try to varying degrees. You're adjusting to a new system. And I do maintain it's just one game. I'm not pigeonholing Erik Gustafsson for the entire season. I'm not saying it's a failed signing or anything yet. Like let's stop short of that. But you can't ignore that first game. The difference between, you know, turnovers from some other players versus some of the turnovers you saw from Erik Gustafsson, like it was concerning. You are not a rookie. You're a veteran in this league, and you're going to give him some time to adjust, and maybe this gets better as the season goes on, depending on how many games he plays coming up here. But he did not look good. It's one example. It's not like if Erik Gustafsson had a good game, the entire Red Wings team would have had a good game. But his, to me, stood out as, oh, that's a bad sign for the whole season if this doesn't kind of work itself out.
And he's got to get his stuff defensively straightened out. Otherwise, poor guy's going to have to deal with the whole, well, why didn't we just keep Gostisbehere then?
Yep.
Conversations all year. Because we had the conversation of they're basically the same player. Why did we not just keep Gostisbehere? Again, yeah, it's one game, but man, it's a tough look when you sign a guy to a 2-year contract. In game 2, he's healthy scratched because he was so bad in game 1. Again, it's early in the season. This is when you're going to notice a lot of mistakes. You're going to, like the Red Wings in that first game, their attention to detail, their attention to coverage, their decision-making with the puck was nothing short of atrocious. But most teams are this time of year because they don't have timing. They don't have that sense of detail. They haven't played a truly competitive game of hockey in, 4, 5, 6 months, depending when their team got eliminated. So it's understandable, which is why nobody's pressing the panic button yet. But the concernometer definitely rose a little bit.
I think with Gustafsson, the 2 most egregious errors I saw in the first game is the first Anthony Beauvillier goal. He kind of just let Crosby walk out in front of the net, and that's probably not the player you want to just give carte blanche to in a high danger area. And as soon as Pittsburgh kind of changed the game plan and started getting pucks in and were playing hard on the Red Wings defense, there were numerous times Gustafsson just threw an errant pass where he thought the winger might be, but there was a Pittsburgh Penguin right behind him. And, you maybe expect that from Simon Edvinsson, getting used to the play and the pace of the NHL. But for a guy like Gustafsson, you can't be having that regardless of what game number it is this season.
So another part of the game, you talk about, letting guys walk out front. Once things start to go downhill, you realize that he was going to get no help. And you kind of got nervous because of what happened when the game collapsed. Well, Ville Husso did as well. That fourth goal was about as soft as they come. And that was it for Husso, pulled in favor of Cam Talbot. And we'll get to Husso being waived afterwards and what that means and whether it was him or roster flexibility or a combination of both. But that was tough. And you know what? I think Talbot did well after that, more or less, to keep the game as close as possible, and then obviously had a great next game. But the team never really kind of recovered from that. There were moments, Tarasenko scored right as a power play expired, and that was his first goal as a Red Wing, and then DeBrincat scored again to make it 5-3 in the third. Credit, actually, Erik Gustafsson got his first point as a Red Wing. DeBrincat picked up the rebound, but ultimately a 6-3 game in the end, where by the end of it, people were leaving the arena.
The Boo Birds were out.
Oh, yeah. And the Tigers' disappointment on Woodward the same day was tough. That was a tough day for Detroit. But the home opener, for a team that's been so bad, so many of the home openers have been just thrillers, exciting, a lot of times really good for the Red Wings. And this one was a bad way to start off the season. And thank goodness there's a game 2 days later, because you know what? That was tough to...
We had one game and then had to record the podcast today. I think the tone would be exceptionally different.
And it was if you went online in the interim, that's the tone. People were justifiably, pissed, upset. I think, again, you have to be careful not to extrapolate over 82 games, but there's no doubt about it. The Red Wings were flat, rusty, bad. They weren't prepared. And you talked about it, Brad, that rust is, you don't say it's acceptable, but you understand why it's there. I think it was a preparedness issue. The only parts that looked good were essentially for the whole game, the top line on offense, and for stints, the second line, although defensively is a different story, and that didn't last the whole game. But all in all, pretty forgettable start for the Red Wings to their season.
We got a glimpse of Edvinsson and Seider as well, and that was nice on the ice for the 1 minute or so that they were on the ice together.
Yeah, at least we got that.
Hey, they were in the ozone the entire time. So probably a good sign.
So that was the Red Wings. In that game, Jeff Petry got hurt, which meant they needed something on the right side. I think they have buffer on the left side for injuries, but on the right side, absolutely not. And I like what the Red Wings did. They gave Johansson his chance. They brought him in. They sat Erik Gustafsson, who had a bad game. They called up Justin Holl, and I know people were up in arms about that. You need right shot defensemen. That's what he's there for. And that, to me, I was a little bit surprised. I wasn't fully expecting Johansson to get a chance that early. I thought the team might think, well, if he is going to be in this game and he didn't have the strongest preseason Johansson, how are we going to shelter him with a team defense that was that bad in game one? But they gave him his shot, and they weren't afraid to do it. And I think it worked out well for him in game two. Didn't play the biggest minutes, didn't do anything, spectacular, but was just solid, steady, at worst not noticeable, which is good for a depth rookie defenseman.
Yeah, every Red Wings defenseman in game one was noticeable for good or bad reasons. So that's definitely an improvement. And yeah, just that overall accountability seems to be a different theme this year, because we've noticed over the years, and it's not just under Newsy's regime, it's going back a while, that you could almost write the lineup in pen most nights. Didn't even matter who the player was or what their role was. You knew who was playing where, when. They were in the lineup. They weren't coming out. Anybody over the age of 30 was a lock to never be scratched. So seeing Gustafsson come out already is very notable. Obviously, the Husso thing. Taking a chance on Johansson. Yeah, he had a plainly bad preseason from what I expected from him. But obviously with the waiver status, he had to stay up or else they would have lost him. So it was good to see him get in. It was good to see Newsy not be afraid to use him. Hull is perfect for this. If you have to yo-yo a guy, he's the guy to do it. Just come in and spot fill as needed. Yeah, I like the overall approach on defense in terms of how they're managing it, because nobody's getting a free ride this year is the early message, which is huge because way too many guys on the Red Wings over the last decade have had free rides.
Edvinsson, Holl, Mata Johansson was, to me, not guaranteed to work, but I thought as well for Edvinsson and Holl, they both had Holl's first game of the season, he was way more steady than I was expecting him to be. And Edvinsson was substantially better in game 2, to the point where I'm like, that is a defenseman to be excited about for the entire season.
Bad news for Jeff Petry. Through no fault of his own. Again, sometimes all it takes is an injury for a coach to get a look at something else that works better. And I'm not saying Justin Holl is better than Jeff Petry, but if Edvinsson and him are working better than him and Petry worked in game 1, well, probably not a lot of reason to go back to it.
So game 2 against the Nashville Predators, tough task considering the weapons that they had, but Detroit hung on for a 3-0 win. It was a shutout victory from Cam Talbot. And let's not, beat around the bush. That was still a goalie game. Whether or not the Red Wings are better, that was a goalie game. Cam Talbot is the one who won it for them. Outstanding, not, a routine, steady shutout with no danger shots against. No, he made clutch saves for Detroit. Was fantastic. Don't look into the history of other Red Wings goalies who have come in and had shutouts in their debuts, the likes of Reimer and Husso. So don't look for trends there, but I've been really impressed by Cam Talbot in the game in a bit that he's played so far.
That may have been actually one of the most impressive defensive games Mo Seider's had in his career, and that says a lot given the effort he has to make night in and night out. He was a man possessed in the D zone. He was blocking shots from everywhere. I was incredibly surprised to see his dedication to putting the body on the line in game 2 of the season.
Mo Seider to start the 2024-2025 season. I think this is Ice Hockey Gifts who tweeted this. 26 minutes and 15 seconds time on ice per games played, 15 hits to lead the NHL, 8 blocks, 2 assists +2. And that leg save, that kick save he made, probably saved the shutout as well. Like, Seider is the guy who they paid for. I honestly laugh every time I see Seider go out there, and in spite of the team around him, is just the one dragging this team forward defensively. Because then I just think about everyone who's like, they only look at their numbers and their metrics, and they're like, is he actually good? I'm like, it does not take a lot of time to watch this guy to understand how good he is. So, for as good as Edvinsson was, you're thankful that you have Mo Seider leading the way too. Raymond as well, I think, through 2 games, has just been that guy as well.
He's got a big contract to live up to, and we've seen time and time again many examples in the NHL of guys getting paid and then joining the country club. And they just phone it in and, look at Jonathan Huberdeau over in Calgary as probably the most recent example. So to see that he's not just carrying over last year, but arguably elevating is huge because, again, it's the first year of an 8-year contract that we expect him to get better almost every year of the deal if all goes according to plan.
So the scoring opened with JT Compher getting his first of the season, redirecting a point shot from Ben Sherratt. Mo Seider got the secondary assist. And then Andrew Copp was the benefactor of a nice play, actually, from Simon Edvinsson, and a little saucer over to Raymond. One-time slap pass where it wasn't really a slap pass so much as he just shot it off Copp and it deflected in. So Copp got the Justin Abdelkader experience, and the Red Wings went up 2 goals. And then Dylan Larkin, very late in the game, 20 seconds left or so, stripped former Red Wing Gus Nyquist at the blue line, between the blue line and the red line, and sealed the deal 3-0. Nice steal, and good for Larkin to get his first of the season as well. But 3-0 win. The Red Wings were outshot nearly 2-1 overall. 42 shots for the Predators on goal to the Red Wings 22. So when we say a better defensive game, like we were talking about it pre-show, I think they were still the team that has defensive concerns. I think they're still the team that has the holes on their roster, whether you're playing a great team defense game that day or not. But much, much fewer catastrophic defensive failures like you saw in game 1. Just a big sigh of relief. Like that game, to me, I was like, that's the kind of game the Red Wings have to win against better teams, in my mind.
unfortunately, it was kind of their formula from last year. So if they're going to have success this year, they've got to replicate a lot of it, because I didn't look at the deserve to win a meter that, I forget who was it, Money Puck or something puts out. There's no way the Red Wings were in the positive on that one, that game. That was a Cam Talbot win. But yeah, you're right. Even though the defense wasn't great, it was much better than Thursday. Even though the depth forwards weren't great, it was better than Thursday. And it's all about improvement this early in the season. If you're starting to right the ship in certain directions and you progressively do that over the first few weeks, you could look like a completely different team by November 1.
The deserve to win it meter is actually pretty evenly split.
Would not have suspected that.
Yeah.
The expected goals, I think, were almost very similar as well, except Cam Talbot just stopped them all.
Yeah, I think Nashville's were north of 4.
Yeah.
And they got exactly 0. So kudos to Cam Talbot. Thank you to Cam Talbot, because again, coming into this 0-2 would have been a bad tone to start the season. Never mind the episode. Like, we joke, like, oh, the tone of the episode, whatever. We understand that a 2-game sample is a 2-game sample, but there is something to be said about starting the season poorly. Like, look at Buffalo.
I was going to say, it's not only starting the season poorly, in the position they're in with the expectations they have and all the difficulties around them in the conference. Buffalo Twitter, again, I follow a lot of Bills accounts, so they obviously...
You and Newsy, man.
They also, most of these guys cover the Sabres as well. It's a dark place right now.
Well, they've got key injuries to young guys, and they're coming back from Europe with no points. Like, that is a tough way to start, especially in the Atlantic. And on the other side of the coin, you have Montreal. They're already having parades downtown. It's insane, but not off-brand at all. But yeah, you can't fall behind the 8 ball in the Atlantic.
Also, if you say one not exceedingly positive thing about Lane Hudson, they will find you. Montreal fans. They're rabid. And that's just like the moment Montreal is at all relevant, like, people forget they are the most rabid fans in the NHL. I think they are worse than Toronto and Vancouver fans when things are crazy. Like, it is absolutely insane, the Bell Center. Probably the most energetic crowd in the NHL when it's like a big moment, I would say. Anyhow, the Red Wings ended up winning that game, and like we said, it's a great start. 1-1 to start the season. There is one game between now and next episode. It is the Rangers on Monday, October 14th at 7 Eastern, and then we're going to be back with you on Wednesday. That is not going to be an easy game, and right after that, they have the Rangers in Nashville again. So they have it's a tough schedule coming up, depending on what you think of those teams. And the Red Wings have some figuring out to do, which they have already started. So in that game as well, unfortunately, Christian Fischer got hurt, upper body injury. He's day-to-day, so it's not going to be long-term, they don't think, but Derek Lalonde mentioned that he's not going to be available for Monday. And the Red Wings already start to make some moves. Because of their cap and roster situation, more roster than anything, and because Petry's not on IR from his injury, they essentially needed to clear a roster spot. And so they looked at who they had and thought, well, Ville Husso's not going to get claimed if we waive him. $4.75 million this year for one more year, and bad in the home opener. They waived him, and we'll see what happens next in terms of assignment and things like that, and if he reports, et cetera, et cetera. But the purpose of that is to clear the roster spot, because we are thinking it's going to be a veteran. Max Bultman actually acknowledged that he thinks it's going to be a veteran call-up. So probably because it's short-term, we're looking at Austin Watson, and that's why that happened.
And that makes sense. I know everybody's clamoring for Kasper to be up in Detroit.
And we'll get there.
Which I agree with, but it's circumstance dependent. You don't want to yo-yo Kasper. When he's up, you want him to be up. If Watson's going to be the forward that kind of goes up and down as needed, that's A-okay. And if it's only going to be for 1 or 2 games, yeah, you'd rather that be Austin Watson, because you don't want to have a guy like Kasper worry about where he's playing, what team he's playing for, where he's going, and all that. You just want him to play hockey and focusing on playing hockey. So if he's going to be in one place, you want him to be there consistently. If we find out Christian Fischer dislocated his shoulder and he's out 6 to 8, that's Marco Kasper. Day to day, that's Austin Watson.
Something else I want to talk about now, seeing Justin Holl through that game. We don't know what Petry's health is going to be like, and we don't know how that right side is going to fill out. But like you look at Justin Holl and you're like, why did that game work? First off, they sheltered those minutes and they sheltered those situations. But secondly, and Newsy acknowledged this, just played a simple game. And part of that is what they asked him to do. So it's not like Justin Holl's out there trying to be Erik Karlsson any given night, but just putting him in situations where he can play his game, just be a big body, make the simple plays, just be steady. Can he do that playing against the league's best players? No. We know that for a fact. He's not going to be a top defenseman that way. But if you can be a steady, invisible force on the right side, at the bottom of the deep pairings, that's all they need. It's still a hole on this Red Wings roster. Like, they don't have anyone, no pun intended, Justin Holl. It's a hole. Different pronunciations. Thank you, though, Brad. This second pair right D is a big problem on this Red Wings roster. But if they can get any kind of steadiness from Holl, it would just be a small victory. I'm not going to say you can expect that over 82 games or 80 games after this. But between the two of them, just something would be nice there.
The bar is subterranean.
It is a low bar, man. It is a low bar. Okay, so that is the waiving of Husso. Again, it's for roster reasons, but we talked a lot preseason. The Red Wings have 3 goalies. They don't want 3 goalies. Steve Yzerman said, I don't want to carry 3 goalies. I think part of putting Husso in, like, yeah, we acknowledge that he earned that spot in preseason. I do think he did. Probably to a degree as well, it was the Red Wings throwing him in and saying, okay, let's see how you actually are playing. Them waiving him isn't saying like we're done with him for the year. No, I mean, Talbot could go cold, Lyon could go cold or whatever, and then you're going to cycle through those guys. But do you think this spells an indication towards Talbot and Lyon are going to be your guys for the majority of the season, or too early to tell?
Without injury, I think it's going to be them. Because even if one of them has a cold spell, with their contracts, neither of them are clearing waivers. That's the difference between them and Husso, regardless of performance. 4.75 is going to get through waivers pretty easily. Lyon's 900 thou, and he was over 900 on this save percentage last year. That gets claimed by 15 teams if he goes on waivers. Talbot's got the extra year, but it's only 2.5. He's an established starter. There's always goalie needy teams who would happily pay that for a backup.
Colorado would right now.
Yeah, either Lyon or Talbot could be their starter if they went on waivers.
Just take Ville Husso, Colorado. Just do it.
It's fine. And the Jack Campbell thing now all of a sudden makes sense for Husso to go to Grand Rapids and be that veteran presence with Cossa, which again, not ideal for 4.75 and not ideal for Ville Husso himself, but again, as I alluded to earlier this episode, the Red Wings have never seemed to make the hard decision when necessary over the last 10 years, ever since this rebuild started. The veterans were in a country club. They were never going to see the press box. Poor performance from those guys never seemed to end up in a demotion to the AHL until it got so egregiously bad they had no other option. Yeah, it sucks, man, for Ville Husso. I feel so bad for the guy, but this was the obvious solution all along. The only thing that prevented this from being the opening night solution was Husso was really good in preseason, so it made him second guess it.
And I think that's a good thing because, like I said, then you have the reasoning to put him in and put him to the test with that opening night net. So the context matters. You don't want to be the Buffalo Sabres, but figuring this out early is important. And it's also important to say things could turn around for Erik Gustafsson. Things could turn around for Ville Husso. You don't really need Ville Husso to be prime Carey Price. You just need, between your 3 goalies, enough to get 82 games where you can expect at least average goaltending. That's not how it's going to work out. There's going to be stinkers in there, but you want average goaltending at the very least if you're the Red Wings, because if your goaltending falls through the floor, we've seen they don't have the team defense, but they especially don't have the actual defense to hold them up. So I fully agree. It's nice to see the decisions being made now. And it makes sense too. If the Red Wings have ambitions of being a wildcard team, they don't have a bona fide guaranteed playoff roster. So you're going to have to figure this out all on the go. They gave Johansson a chance after a hard preseason for him, and it turned out well. Good on them and good on him.
And this has a lot of roster implications going forward if they do, in fact, end up assigning Husso to Grand Rapids, because as much as it made sense because of, well, a lot of other poor decisions they made to lead to it, going into the season with a roster of 12, 8, and 3 is like no team wants to carry that configuration for 2 weeks, let alone a season. So we knew all along something had to give. And obviously the 8 defenseman thing, just with the position they're in, might be likely, especially if Petry's injuries touch and go. But they probably want to be carrying an extra forward. And based on the performance of at least half the forwards on this team so far, a lot of good press box candidates in that group, which there's Marco Kasper's spot. Now, obviously, some of these guys are going to get a longer leash than Husso did just because of the awkwardness of 3 goalies in his contract. But if Veleno keeps being invisible like he is, if Berggren's not providing any offense, if that shutdown line continues to not shut down anybody, it's not going to be hard to find a spot for Kasper in the next month. Now, again, early, always time for all of these guys to right their own ship. But right now, you're looking all of a sudden at this flexibility at defense and forward with carrying only 2 goalies. A lot of guys' spot in the lineup is very much in jeopardy in conjunction with the Husso possibly going to Grand Rapids thing.
Well, you've got lots of flexibility because there's about 6 guys who are essentially all of the same skill level and all fill the same need on the team. So it allows you to make quick decisions on them. You know, for speaking specifically for the goalies, coming out of preseason, we just said, you could start any one of them. It could be Husso. It could be Cam Talbot. It could be Alex Lyon. And it's very easy to just make a informed decision quickly on them or on the bottom 6 in the forward group. They all kind of are the same with some different skill sets than the other. You can make very quick decisions because you've got guys in Grand Rapids ready to go, or you can have someone else play their spot and you don't really miss a beat.
We'll see what the Red Wings do coming up if they, end up calling up Watson or if it's an 11-7. I think this roster is going to be really dynamic for the first while here as they figure out what works for them. I'm going to have the Kasper conversation here, but first we're going to take a quick break to hear from the sponsors of the Winged Wheel podcast. This episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for Detroit, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer, and it's great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. The Grand Rapids season opener. And they played a game since, and it didn't go as well, but I want to talk about the season opener for one reason, and that's Marco Kasper. There are plenty of Grand Rapids players who look good. Carter Mazur had a goal. Austin Watson had a couple assists, I believe. Sebastian Cossa was stellar in his 35-save shutout. But Marco Kasper had a goal and assist. It could have been more. He was all over the ice. I was watching that game. I was like, oh my God, he looks like a different Griffins player from last season. Like, this looks like a guy who's too good for the AHL. My internet was going nuts. The dogs needed a walk, so I took him out. I came back, caught up on the game, and I was like, maybe the second half wasn't as... No, Marco Kasper belongs in the NHL, man. Like, you guys know me. I'm not the kind of guy who likes to beat the same dead horse forever. I like to move us on so we're not piling onto one topic, but Marco Kasper belongs in the NHL. Brad outlined why he's not up yet right now in the Red Wings' reasoning, but it doesn't change the fact that he is objectively ready for the NHL and better than at least a handful of the guys who are there, and at least in how they've played the first couple of games. The moment a medium-term spot opens up, Kasper is in it. He has to be. He is too good. Too good.
Halloween. That's my benchmark. If he's not up by Halloween, there's two reactions. One, the Red Wings are like 7-2-1.
In which case, great.
Great. Don't touch the lineup. It's working. We're happy. Or B, well, there is no other excuse. He has to be up. Again, the first two games are an indication. The top six, and I'm not going to list them all out, you know who they are, have been good. Mostly they've been good. A few of them have been elite. Nobody's surprised. The bottom six on this team has been a glaring problem both games. I can't point to a single player in that group and go, they're playing good. Right? Kasper's playing great. Kasper outperformed all of them comfortably in the preseason. Unless the team is winning at a ridiculous pace, there's no reason he shouldn't take one of their jobs by Halloween.
If the Red Wings are, well, they're not going to be 7-2-1. Maybe I'll be wrong.
Say into the camera.
They won't be 7-2-1.
Red Wings admin, you heard him. That's Evan and Evan only. Brad and I, we looked at him and scoffed, for the record.
On the outside shot that the Red Wings are 7-2-1.
How easily a man has pushed off his standards.
On the possibility that they're 7-2-1. But in all seriousness, if this team is anywhere near 500 and their MO over the past 2 seasons have been, we need to make the playoffs, I don't even think it matters if there's an injury. You've got to make a roster move to bring up someone who can help you win now in Marco Kasper.
Well, that's the thing with Kasper, and that was my whole argument in the preseason episode was, if you want to win now, Kasper should be in the lineup. He's better than 3, 4, 5 of the guys at forward already. You want to focus on the future? Okay, develop your prospect, get him ready for the future in the NHL. There's no reason he shouldn't be up, and that's the thing with the Husso move. The roster flexibility is now there. They can carry 13 forwards and 8D. They can carry 14 forwards and 7D if they want.
No one's losing sleep if the Red Wings have to healthy scratch anyone in the bottom six so that Marco Kasper can get adequate ice time.
And there's like moments in the bottom six where I think any individual player had a good little stretch. But by and large, like Brad said, if you look at most of the problems that the team has had outside of their defense, which is the bulk of it, and then the next tier was, Ville Husso's first game. Yeah, the bottom six is where you're going to have those questions.
That should hopefully make those guys better, because if they're not playing well, and all of a sudden Marco Kasper comes up, if I'm the head coach, I'm grabbing these guys and pointing right at this kid and being like, he's here to take your job. If you don't get better, you won't play.
And Lalonde's already doing it with the D. That's why promising. I'm thinking this might be a possibility. Again, maybe not this week or next week, but soon. Gustafsson, garbage game. Out. Johansson, you're going in.
Yep.
Right? Like, if they're not afraid to make those moves on D, they absolutely should not be afraid to make those moves on forward.
And I don't think they will be. I think the team is thinking much the same as what we said, which is it's just a couple games. You don't extrapolate too far. For the extremes, which very obviously weren't working, Ville Husso, Erik Gustafsson, etc., you make the moves you need to make. But for the bottom six, for example, you do give it some time. You see how things shake out. You see if you need to shake up the lines overall. But I don't really think this is a version of the Red Wings, like you said, Brad, that we've seen in the past. It's going to let those things sit and just fester. They want to be 7-2-1. And if the bottom six are all playing great and they get better game after game after game, then Kasper's going to have a hard time finding a spot long-term, barring injury. But then the Red Wings are going to have a record that's going to probably look a lot better than 500, or at least trending towards an early playoff positioning around Thanksgiving. I know Friedman loves to use that benchmark. So it really is as simple of a thing as the moment there's a permanent spot or a long-term spot open, it is a no-brainer. The Red Wings have the luxury of Marco Kasper has answered that question. It's not a season where you're like, well, who would you call up? None of these kids are ready. No. Danielson, the year in the AHL will do him well. Mazur, I actually think Mazur could slot into the lineup and fit just fine, but Marco Kasper has stood out. He has taken a leap from last season. He took a leap over the offseason and preseason, and he's not showing any signs of slowing down. This will feel like a million miles away, I think, the moment Marco Kasper's in the lineup. And I also want to put out there, this isn't to say Marco Kasper comes in and then the Red Wings are all of a sudden winning every game. He is not going to be putting up, 6 or 7 additional standings points over the course of a season. No, but it's just about adding good players who deserve to be in the lineup over the guys you have in there now.
Why not? You don't know till you know.
And it's not like if Kasper comes up, it's like, oh, well, where are you going to play him? We can't sit Joe Veleno in the press box for 3 weeks. First of all, sure you can. But that's not what would happen. Okay, Veleno has a bad game. He's out. All right, Berggren had a bad game. He's out. Veleno, you're back in. Okay, Mott had a bad game. Out. Copp had a bad game. Out. You can run this rotation of like the guys that deserve to play are going to play and the guys that don't deserve to play aren't going to play. After a month, Kasper has a really bad week. All right, kid, press box, regroup, get your stuff together, get back out there.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's not coming in and playing 80 straight games. I would imagine.
Maybe.
That would be where the 6 points are coming from. But it would give him an opportunity to kind of refresh. Those back-to-backs as a young kid get really difficult, and you can learn a lot from the press box as a young player, so it's not always a negative.
I think you're both of you exactly right in terms of how that goes. And that's the part of the conversation where I think the fandom gets a little bit like it's misconstrued as, Copp or Veleno or Berggren or whoever is having a bad game. Like, why are you giving up on them? It's not that. It's that you have the part of your lineup that's working well, and the press box is there for a reason. You're not going to see the Kopps in there very often. You're not going to see the Rasmussens in there very often. For the veterans, it would have to get pretty bad. But for the Berggrens and for the bottom line players, there's a purpose to it, and it's perfect for letting guys see the game from overhead and see how things unfold. And it helps kind of like you said, refresh them and understand what went wrong last game and what they need to be doing, and also just to cycle in the players who are ready and deserve that moment. So, yeah, I'm excited to see Marco Kasper on this team. No matter what the expectations are in terms of actual output, I do think he's just so ready for the NHL
overseasoned.
Now. Yeah. And if you're going to take one thing away from these first 2 games, which is probably a little rich to do, it's the fact that the Red Wings haven't been afraid to do this. And so I'm not nervous that they're not going to bring him up at the first halfway decent opportunity. Now, Austin Watson coming up, short term. Fischer, like you said, Brad, that's short term. You don't want to yo-yo Kasper. That makes sense. So that's not what this is. And feel how you want to feel about the Watson signing, but I don't have any problem at all if that's how that one turns out to be.
We should probably throw it out there just in the off chance. I wouldn't be surprised if they call Kasper up here and then they make lineup adjustments elsewhere to keep him up.
Or they go 11-7 as also a possibility.
Yeah. But Watson, just given the situation, feels like the most likely.
Okay. That is the Red Wings. That is their first 2 games. Again, we'll see how things go, but let's jump over to the NHL, and we can't start talking about the NHL without talking about the Utah HCs. 3-0, leading the league, electric start. 2 thoughts. First, that new team excitement bounce. We talked about that. You figured that might be the case. Secondly, I really, really feel for Arizona Coyotes fans, man. Like, that has to be tough because you're like, why are people surprised? These are just the Coyotes. It's the same team. They made a lot of changes. Granted, Utah got really aggressive, but that's got to hurt for them.
First of all, you referred to them as the Utah HCs. I can't express enough how much I hate that. Never do that again.
It stands for hardcore, right?
That's how everyone describes Utah. That's staying in.
Secondly,
until they get a team name, that's what I'm going to call them.
Secondly, yeah, you feel for Coyotes fans, but at the same time, the reason Utah's a lot better this year is because they did spend money in the offseason, which was never going to happen in Arizona. They weren't going to trade for Sergachev. They weren't going to trade for Marino. They weren't going to sign the guys they did. They improved the team, and they obviously have a really good young core up and coming. Gunther looks unreal. Keller's still sick. Cooley's obviously a real nice player. Like, they're a different team than they were last year. Not dramatically, but yeah, new team bump. They made improvements in the right spots. It's not entirely unsurprising that they're starting on a heater.
It is sad as a Red Wing to see that their team is being led by the youth movement right now, and they've scored 5 goals in each of their games. And believe it or not, Barrett Hayton has over a point per game right now. So everything is firing in Utah. This is probably the dream start for them.
Elsewhere in the NHL, not a lot of you can't draw too many conclusions from just a couple games, but you were talking, Brad. Edmonton 0-2, Colorado 0-2, Nashville 0-2, one of those being at the hands of the Red Wings. Carolina is technically right now dead last in the East. It is 1-2 games in. You can't draw any sample sizes or conclusions from this, but it is funny to see how the season's starting out. In Colorado especially, what are they going to do at goalie?
Husso?
It would be a stupid idea, but I'm not going to sit here and say it's a 0% chance. I'd say 1, maybe. But you're right. If it was Lyon or Talbot on waivers, instant claim.
Oh, they wouldn't get to Colorado. That would be Colorado's biggest problem there. I mean, Edmonton started last year 2-9-1 and made it to Game 7 of the Cup Finals. So yeah. I'm not drawing too many conclusions here, other than I am really looking forward to that Montreal-Utah Stanley Cup Final.
The league would love that.
That would be perfect.
I don't know what the viewership would be in the States because I don't know how much interest Utah is going to draw in their first year. That remains to be determined. But in terms of gate and things like that, Montreal's just going to print money for them. And for Utah, then they can just, whatever they don't make in immediate money, they're going to point to future expansion teams and be like, that's why we justify the $2 billion expansion fee. So more on goalies in a second, but other league news. The Toronto Maple Leafs are rumored to be shopping Timothy Liljegren. Doesn't really seem to be a fit for him there. Can't crack the lineup. Right shot defenseman. I remember Liljegren because he was one of the players that I wanted the Red Wings to draft back in the day. That's not what I'm talking about, though, right now. I'm thinking he's a right shot defenseman. Not terrible. 2 years, $3 million. I don't know that this could ever make sense for the Red Wings, and what would Toronto even be asking for? And, whatever mock-up you have in your head of the Red Wings taking on Liljegren and Toronto taking on money back probably isn't realistic. But just for the sake of the conversation, is he an option for the Red Wings to just spot fill in that second pair right D shot?
I'll say here what I put in the group chat when this was brought up. I don't think Liljegren is anything special, but he is a lot better than every other option we have on the right side behind Moritz Seider. I'm not paying a premium to get him, and I can't imagine the Leafs would let him go for anything less than a second-round pick, which would make that a no for me if that's the ask. But anything less than that,
I think the ask is less than that.
If it is, I'd be all over it.
But the thing is, you'd want to move money, and Toronto's not the team to be taking on money either.
You can do that elsewhere. This is the part, and this is the conversation, and you're right in that this is how GMs think, and I don't want this to be a shot at you, even though I love taking shots at you when I can.
You should do it more often.
Vegas and Florida have taught us, if you're sitting here going, it's hard to move money, fold your franchise, quit your job. It is super easy to move money and make salary cap space. If the Red Wings needed to fit $3 million on their roster tomorrow, there's ways they could do that. That would not hurt your roster all that much.
No, and it's a good point. And the only reason I think it's going to be cheaper is because the league looks at 2 years, $3 million, and they're like, that is not nothing. And if he can't crack your roster, why am I paying a second? So that's why I think that price is low. The same way Detroit couldn't, unless they shipped him out with a lot, they couldn't get rid of Justin Holl. He makes $400,000 more a year, but the same term remaining. So
the only difference is Liljegren is quite a bit better than Holl.
Right, but the other teams are going to look at that and say neither one of them are cracking a roster. So I don't know that there's that much of a difference in terms of perceived value in my mind.
I wonder if Toronto would retain if the price got good enough.
Nothing to beat the door down. I don't think Liljegren would come in and be a steady, absolute, rock-solid top four defenseman any given day for Detroit, but there's a chance he could be a better option. Not really something I'm putting too much thought into, but just for the sake of the discussion, I thought it was interesting.
When it was first presented to me, the first thought that I kind of had was it lessens the problem, right? I don't think Liljegren's a world beater defensively. He is a good puck mover, very capable with it on his stick, which is something the Red Wings desperately lack on the blue line. But he is making the problem at that spot in the lineup less than it is now.
A couple other quick NHL notes here. First, I know we mentioned this in the past, but just to keep it up, it really does look like that wall between the NCAA and the CHL is coming down. There is an expected vote to grant Canadian major junior players, so players from the CHL, eligibility to play in the NCAA sometime in the coming months. The meeting has been moved and things like that, but it has massive implications for the junior and major junior pipeline to the NHL. It is going to shake up the way the CHL and other Canadian leagues work. It's going to shake up the NCAA, how other leagues work. It could open up more programs in NCAA hockey. Like, it is, people are going to be pissed, but I can't help but think of this as a bonus for players, prospects, teams as well. You get players in their ideal program, their ideal setup. I'm always a fan of these young kids having an opportunity to get some kind of education as well. Like, it can't hurt, whether or not, some try more than others, to put it gently. But this is, all in all, in my mind, a good thing. And these barriers should be the things to come down to better the sport.
From a high-end hockey standpoint, there is almost no downside to this. It's going to strengthen the CHL and the NCAA, because obviously then some of the top CHL players who may or may not be ready to go to the NHL, AHL, whatever, can go to the NCAA route. Some of those exceptional overagers the CHL gets every year can then jump over to the NCAA, because those guys don't often get high-end pro contracts. It's going to be good for the CHL because, a guy like Macklin Celebrini, who went the USHL route because he wanted to maintain his college eligibility, could then just go to the CHL instead. He doesn't have to go to a lesser league to maintain his eligibility. And we've seen lots of players in Canada do this. You look at Michael Hague as one of the most recent examples. He went, instead of coming to report to the OHL, went and played with Chicago in the USHL so that he could go play at the University of Michigan. Those guys could now go to the OHL, WHL, QMJHL until they feel they're ready to make the jump to NCAA. Where this is going to harm hockey is the lower levels, the USHL, the BCHL, the AJHL, U Sports, because these players don't have incentive to go to those leagues anymore. They can play at a higher level without fear of limitations. So while we've seen guys like Kent Johnson in the BCHL, Cale Makar in the AJHL, there's no need for them to do that anymore. They could just go to the WHL if they so choose, and then when they turn 18, hop on over to the NCAA.
Okay. Oh, I can't skip past this. The Brady Tkachuk head fake thing. Down 4-1 doing that. Like, people were mad at that. I was like, dude, that's just funny. Is it stupid? Yeah.
You can't be mad that people say hockey players don't have personality, but then also get mad at that because it's objectively hilarious.
Are you new here? This is what hockey media has been doing for the last, how long's the NHL existed?
Like, I'm not out here defending Brady Tkachuk or anything like that. It was just a funny thing on the ice. Also, this whole redirection of anger now between Atlantic teams, it's Ottawa and Montreal more so than anything. I mean, Detroit and Ottawa haven't played yet this year, so we'll see how that goes. But Ottawa and Montreal, now that Montreal has life again as a franchise, they're ready to fight at all times. It is extremely funny to not be involved in it.
The mid-off grows.
I love how they're just ready to accept any rivalry that could possibly happen.
It's what the league needs more of. Less sportsmanship between franchises, more blood feuds.
Agreed.
No soap opera, lots of soap operas. That's the solution. Okay, we are going to jump into overtime on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast.
We're going to overtime.
Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. Again, the bonus episodes, the ticket giveaways, the Discord, and lots more. You allow us to do things like support the Jamie Daniels Foundation through initiatives like Winged Wheel Podcast Nights in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins. Additionally, Hot Stove Rounding the Bases with Mike Tirico and guests is on Tuesday, January 14th. That's in support of the Jamie Daniels Foundation. Go to jamiedanielsfoundation.org to find out more. Fantastic event. Highly recommend you get your tickets. Again, jamiedanielsfoundation.org. Okay, let's jump into our overtime questions and comments. Bert Rito says, hi guys, longtime Detroit Red Wings fan from Sydney, Australia here. Congrats on the shoey. I guess I just assume because of Daniel Ricciardo, every Aussie is happy about shoeys making it into other cultures, but assuming here. Could you tell me who gets their name engraved on the Stanley Cup? Is it the entire roster and front office? So player-wise, The standard is they have to have played either half of the regular season or more, or at least one game in the Stanley Cup final. Teams can make requests for players to get their name engraved if they are, a super important player and something happened, or, injury just made them miss the mark, or they're their captain, whatever it is. Not guaranteed to be approved, but they can review. And then, the front office management. And then really from there, they have some choices on how far they want to include. Like I know sometimes ownership just puts someone's name in who otherwise wouldn't be on different teams, but that's the gist of it. Next question here. Michael Tarmina says, Yzerman is going hard with cap moves already this season by burying the Holl and now Husso contracts in Grand Rapids. What's the motivation? Could he add pieces in the middle of the season, cover Kane's bonus in 2024, or simply maintaining flexibility to do either of those depending on the team situation?
Here's the real answer. All of the above.
Yeah. Yeah, that you're exactly right. Like, you just want the flexibility. Next question here. Joey Jojo Shabadoo says, well, I was worried after the first game, but the boys looked great against Nashville. About the Petry injury, what were your thoughts? All respect to him as a person, and I don't want to be mean about it, but that looked really weak. He was out of position, threw a relatively weak hit, and injured his shoulder in doing so. That did not look like an NHLer getting injured. Am I missing something?
Shoulders are weird, man. I don't even know for sure if it's been announced as a shoulder. Like, when I first thought it was his wrist. But, I don't know. All those joints are weird. It takes the littlest tweak to just send you into a world of pain.
I always struggle to diagnose a player and say that was a weak way to get injured. You don't know what they have as a residual injury. You don't know what else happened earlier that just wasn't shown in replays. Overall, I don't think it really changes the calculus of the bottom of the Red Wings lineup. Like we talked earlier, Holl and Petry and Johansson, whoever else, it's basically going to be who can be the most steady and least problematic. Petry was over deployed last year, and that's a problem. The Red Wings haven't really solved that problem yet so far, so they might keep trying to do that. Was he good on balance? No. Was Holl good last year on balance? No. Has Gustafsson been good so far through a preseason in one game? No. So you're really kind of just shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic some games, and some games you might find something that works. Moving on to our next question. C-Nods says, I'm concerned the Wings can only dump and chase without super effective forecheck or good puck retrieval. You guys are a lot more familiar with real hockey strategy. Is this a viable strategy long-term for our personnel, and could it be effective? Is my concern / frustration valid?
I don't like chip and chase hockey. It's not the best way to succeed in the modern NHL. That being said, you can do it, and you can do it very well. Look at Carolina. But you have to have the personnel to do it. The Red Wings chip the puck, I think, higher than average in the league, but they're not crazy. They're not like light years ahead of everybody else in how often they do it. Where they struggle, and I think this is like a 2-3 year rolling average, so the numbers might not be exactly to what this roster is. They are one of the worst retrieval teams in the league, which means they chase it, and then they don't get it at a lower rate than everybody else. And when you look up and down their roster, yeah, that makes sense. The Larkin line generally doesn't need to chip it a whole hell of a lot. The second line, a lot of guys there who aren't going to win puck battles. And then you have nobody who can skate in the bottom six. So they are not beating any defenseman to a puck, and it's going to be a very, very low rate. Also, one of the things that I've noticed is the Red Wings with the early season detail. If you're going to chip it doesn't just mean abandon the puck into the ozone and go get it. There's strategy to it, right? If you're coming with a full head of steam and you have nobody with you, you're chipping that to the side you're on because you are the chase. If you got a winger with a full head of steam coming down the far side and you're on the opposite boards and you don't have a lot of momentum, you put it into that corner so that guy goes and gets it. And I'm not seeing a lot of that detail so far early in the season with the Red Wings, which doesn't help.
Jenna Talia says, Johansson looked really good in his first game. Are your expectations changing from seventh D-man? I don't want to put too much pressure. I would say, yeah, maybe 6, like maybe everyday top 6 guy, but it's still early. Like you've seen guys come in and be decent for a couple games here and there. It's one game, and I think really to say Johansson's going to be more than that this season, you have to see him do it for 20 consistent games, maybe.
Just remember where the bar is set on this.
He could be the third best defenseman at the end of the season.
Dude.
And he might still be struggling.
Yeah. It's all relative, I think. That's really what it comes down to.
And more on the defense. The imperfect patron says, besides Holl, what other right-handed D could realistically be called up from Grand Rapids? Brogan Rafferty, could we accelerate ASP's timeline? Just kidding, but maybe not really. Also, unless something else changes with the trade, is ASP in serious contention to make the team next year simply by virtue of being a right-handed shot?
More than I would have given credence to 6 months ago, but I still think it's a long shot. And I mean, they recalled Brogan Rafferty, 37 times last year? What's one more?
You know, we'll see this season Antitomi still has as well. I didn't really see anything from anyone else in preseason that made me think, yeah, that guy's ready. But I know the team still has some faith in him, even though I probably was lower on him than I should have been. But you're not inspired. We'll see how the season goes for Sandin Pellikka. He's already showing up on highlights as you expect. Okay, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. We're going to be back with you on Wednesday. Very happy the season has started. Very happy that we have games to talk about. So the one game between now and then, we'll see how it goes. We'll see who the Red Wings call up. Let's see how Cam Talbot and Alex Lyon do in the next game. Let's get the season going. Thank you all so much for tuning into the Winged Wheel Podcast. If you're new to the show and want to support the show even further, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. And if you want to support the show but Patreon's not for you, leave us a rating wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe, whether it's YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Subscribing and those ratings, the thumbs up, all that really helps. Tell a friend about the show. And again, Patreon supporters, they get the Discord access, the ticket giveaways, the bonus episodes, and lots more. We'd also like to thank all the sponsors of the Winged Wheel Podcast, Labatt Blue Light, and more. And to our name level sponsors on Patreon, Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Victor Zetterberg, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Whitehead, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Adam Rose, Adam Zoiza, Admiral Matt S. at the Cheesebag Navy, Asher Killian, Carl Brutina Nanaluski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Cider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, almost got me Marlon, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, God Creatives, Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam El Kassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, Jenna Talia, John Engels, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, Mr. Kuzi, new name level supporter, Putty, new name level supporter, R.A., Raul Pud, Riley Enright, Ryan Britt, Scott Martin, Skeletor, That's What I Appreciates About You, The New Jackson 5 Holes, Wellman's Elite Dancing D, Winged Boogie, Iserplan Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A.A. Ron, A.B., All Motor No Hands, Ann Stanislavski, Axel Sandy Pellikka, Bellingham Acid Balls, Bex, Chimkim Nutgits, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsukes Dangleberries, Dylan Larkin, Trade Sacrifice, Eric Nance, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Grepsky, Griffey Boy, Huge in Korea, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, Jim, J.M. Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, Josh Yelton, Keenan O'Donohue, Casper the Unfriendly Ghost, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hall, Lucas Raitmond, Ophelia, Proud of You, Winged Wheel Podcast Boys, thank you. Ryan M., new name level supporter, great name Ryan. Steven, that other guy, the Hodag, the Hat123, Trent Thorough, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. Talk to you midweek.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to visit wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you'll find links to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find ways to support the show, like Patreon, official podcast merchandise, and more. And don't forget to follow us on X at Winged Wheel Pod, at Ryan Hanna, WWP, at Brad Crisco, and at Hockeytown Evan, as well as Winged Wheel Podcast on Instagram.